That's a good point. And on that point, how was your day today?
It was good. I worked.
You worked?
Yeah, I work at artistic director. I'm the executive director at Trinity Square Video, which is an artist-run center in Toronto dedicated to video production and exhibition and education.
And what was today like?
Went by fast. Well, I was actually interviewed in the morning by some academics, so it's kind of great that I'm sandwiching the day between two interviews. So and that's how I started it, and then dealing with members, I did return equipment, writing a grant, eating my lunch, things like that.
Busy day.
Okay, 1 second.
Yeah. Okay, so we can begin with you telling us your name and a bit about your work and what it addresses queer liberation.
Okay. My name is Roy Mitchell, and for a paycheck, I'm the executive director of Trinity Square Video, which is an artist-run center which has its history. It's 40 years old this year. Has its history in activists and artists working at a time when the images on TV, video was not as accessible as it is now, and you didn't have YouTube, and artists and activists basically got together and said, let's start a co-op, it was a co-op at the time, to create work that represented them. So it just sort of came out of the mid-70s, went through the identity politics, went through queer theory. All of those things informed the organization and continue to inform the organization. So that's what I do, and I'm really happy to be there because it has its roots in activism. I'm also on the Pride board through a crazy thing that happened last year around censorship. It got me involved as an artist because I'm anti-censorship, and so I ran for the board on that kind of a ticket, and I'm trying to change what Pride is on the inside, which is a really trippy thing to do. And what else do I do? I do a lot of social intervention stuff, like activism, or bringing people together, that kind of stuff.
And can you share with us experiences, and this could be activist type experiences, academic or artistic, that you've had that you think is significant for how we think about queer liberation as theory or practice?
Okay. I'll tell you what I did last night. Okay. Yesterday, because of all the stuff that's happening with the cuts from Rob Ford's regime at City Hall, and the threats to everything, basically, that keeps the city alive, and the things that we want to live in the city for, the soul of the city, some people have said. And as an artist, I realize that when cuts come, the artists are the first to go. And sometimes it's hard not to justify that, right? Because do you want a daycare or do you want a mural on the street? So it's pitting one group against another group. It's divide and conquer. And so what I wanted to do is work with actors. A group of us met at Buddies in Bad Times Theatre about a month ago, and it was in response to the funding cuts to Summerworks Theatre, where the Heritage Canada, a not arm's length jury, a not arm's length funder, decided to pull funding from Summerworks and give it to other organizations. It wasn't really clear from Heritage why the funding was pulled, but it was pulled because we believe, what everyone believes, is because they produced a play that the Sun and attacked for being pro-terrorist or sympathetic to terrorists. And so all these actors met because of that, but also because of what's happening at City Hall. And we created a group around the idea of creative responses to what's happening. And so yesterday we had an event sort of sandwiched in at the Summerworks at the Mocha Courtyard, where people were asked to come and give a creative proposal at a mic about how we can actually deal with this. So we had artists, we had people coming in off the street, standing up, giving us ideas. People asked to bring pie or dessert so we could have food when we were there. And what happened is we're going to create these page with these ideas, and people that want to can take ownership of them, can lead them, can morph them into different actions. And trying to link not only artists against disciplines, because in Toronto, probably has to do with the funding models, but artists from different set practices don't necessarily mix. So I don't know a lot of dancers or writers or watercolor painters, right? I don't know those people that well. I know a lot of media art and filmmakers, and that's my niche. But I think as artists, we have to reach out and get to know each other so that when we make the links to the daycare cuts or the library cuts or the grants and help other people do other things in the TTC, so that we are kind of have a voice that we know each other. So I believe in building a strong, connected, identifiable base to build a politic from. And I think what's happened historically is that base has been destroyed or fractured, whether it's fractured from us going, I'm not that identity, or it's fractured because the government comes in and separates us because of funding cuts. So what I think we have to do is a lot of healing around coming together as groups, large groups, so that when we trust each other, so that we will trust each other, so when it comes time to do political action, we're ready to move. And that's what it's about. So what happened last night was amazing. It was very social. People came. A kid did a rap song. A person had an idea. There was almost like a performance arts piece. And 2 or 3 ideas, actually, people owned them there and said, I'll take that on. People were walking up to them and said, I want to help too. So it was a flurry of people actually taking ownership of ideas and creating ideas and wanting to see this grow and making links to other organizations. So that's the first part of the question. What was the second part of the question? How does this link to queer?
Yes. How is this significant for how we think about queer liberation as theory or practice?
Well, the theory I will leave up to theorists. And practices, I've always believed that putting my body in a place that's politicizes that place. So whether it's going to a march or going to a dinner party or going to a place where I have a queer body, and even though I might have a privileged queer body, it's still a queer body. And so when you put your body in those places, whether it's small town Ontario, or whether it's going to a rally, or whether it's going to Pride, you're still actually making your presence known. And sometimes those presences are muffled, right? Or sometimes those presences are washed. But the thing is to try and create a society, to try and create a world where people's presence has validity, right? So, I mean, no matter what you are, your presence at this event, your presence in this room is important, and looking at the things that diminish that presence and trying to eradicate them.
You can pick up from there in terms of how would you define your role in the queer movement. So it's kind of a broader...
Essential. No, I don't know. I mean, the thing is, it's very funny, right? It's very funny. I'm 52 years old, and I've been active, I thought, politically, but never so much as, say, the last year when the sort of this anti-censorship happened, and we were dealing with Kwaya and Kwaya March, Not March, and all that stuff, that I really saw the community come together, right? So we're all part of it, but until we have something to react to, we kind of live in these little worlds. Like, I'm involved in a lot of not a lot of organizations, but a lot of community things. So I try and stay away from structure. So, you know, I don't belong to Queer Ontario, or I don't belong, and not that I don't support those things, but my own art practice is to be an observer, right? Like, I make videos. I like to talk about myself. I like to talk about myself in the world. So for me to kind of become somebody who's like, pride is such an animals for me, right? Because it's just, you know, it is so structured and crazy that I find it like almost like sometimes it's an out-of-body experience to be in that room, right? I go like, governance rules. And somebody once said to me, it actually was Richard Bond, he said, the more freedom you give to queers, the more rules they will make. And so I totally am adverse to the idea of that kind of a lifestyle. I don't like rules, I like actions, I like social. I mean, for me, having a picnic outside of City Hall when they were doing the deputations was much more transformative than actually me giving a deputation. So what I did was I organized a community picnic outside of City Hall to get people to come together, share food, and talk about the issues, and then go into City Hall. First time for a lot of those people that they've ever been to City Hall to find out what a deputation was. And what happened was, because it was on Facebook, the city put police at every entrance to the green roof because they were threatened by picnickers. And so for me, that's great media coverage, right? Like, I mean, oh my God, they're afraid of picnickers. And like, we were just a bunch of people having a picnic, you know, and media came, it was interviewing us, and these people felt like really significant. It was really beautiful, right? Because it wasn't like, it was like, you know, like putting the knife in and turning it and laughing at the government, I guess, in a little bit of a way. But it was fun, and it was food, and it was people, and it wasn't intimidating. So I think access to a lot of these things in our culture are intimidating. I work in an art gallery. It's intimidating to go into an art gallery, right? It's that sort of like, people understand art, I don't. People understand politics, I don't, right? And so what I love to do is create situations where people are loving what they're doing, and they're politicized situations or they're creative situations, and it's like, wow, this is so easy to organize, right? It's like a dinner party, and the other people are bringing the food. So that's what I like to do. So as a queer, I think it's like looking at the structures, challenging those structures that keep people like separate, and bringing people together, right?
How would you define queer liberation?
Did I say I wanted to answer that question?
No, this is one of the required ones. And you can give it some thought. You don't have to rush into it.
Liberation. Okay. How do I define queer liberation?
What does it mean to you?
What does it mean to you? Yeah.
Well, we live it, right? I mean, we live it, and I think there's a difference between this idea of what is queer liberation and something to work toward. I think it's something that you live. And unfortunately, a lot of people can't live it, right? So, I mean, it's like women's liberation or something like that. There are a lot of liberated people, right? I consider myself very liberated. I live within confines that might be, you know, or need to be challenged, of course, we do. But I think that we're Toronto, and for me, what can I do in Toronto? And so queer liberation is, for me, a global thing. So if I might be privileged in Toronto, but what about Uganda? What about people that are living in rural areas? What about, you know, the isolation that people feel? And I think that there's this friction between, you can be queer and liberated in a Northern Ontario town, but just because you're in front of a monitor doesn't mean you're part of the community. So my roots are in community. Like, I grew up in Northern Ontario, and we didn't have the privilege of, you know, division up by identity, or it was like everybody, rich or poor, everybody, men and women, trans folk, native folk, people of color. And if there were, we were together in a basement having a party twice a month, right? So that sort of is what I see as liberating, is to actually be comfortable in your skin and around other people that are different from you. And I think that the queer community is really different. There's so much difference, and the more we create those different things for people to feel comfortable in their skin and come together, so that you're not, you know, I mean, sometimes it's boring, right? You have an all-male event, but sometimes it's great you have an all-male event. But I mean, like, situations where you can create people's comfort in being together is really, for me, a liberated world.
I feel like I can't respond to that. His voice has to be there. So, the last required question is, how is queer liberation expressed in your activism, in your art, in your theory? In your case, you're not
Okay.
theory, but in your art, in your activism, in your community work, in your social.
Well, I guess to backtrack, my queer liberation for me is bringing people together. So the thing I did yesterday, where people come together, and I met Davina at the picnic against the air show. So and I mean, my God, we were on the radio, we were on the TV, we were in the newsprint, people were talking about us, and it was like 12 people sharing potato salad, right? But it was amazing. It was actually, and I totally believe in having fun and enjoying each other. I'm not dogmatic. So for me, my art, my practice, my activism is, if I'm not having a good time, I'm not going to do it, right? Like, I mean, and it's work. I'm not saying it's not work, but it is kind of like, the one thing I like about queers is we know how to make lemonade from lemons, right? And historically, I think when I was coming out and all that stuff, queers created, because of AIDS, a funeral that is a celebration of life, right? I mean, the way we looked after each other in the 80s, and the way we sort of created these structures for us to take care of each other was actually during a really traumatic time in our history, and yet we actually had a good time too. So I think that there's something to be said for having people enjoy their lives, having people enjoy their freedoms and understand that they can work in a really positive way to make things fun, to make things enjoyable. My art practice tends to be about me and my position in the world, so I do a lot of stuff around videos around certain things I'm thinking about. My current video that I'm working on is about, because I've been commissioned to do a piece for an arts organization in Ottawa that's using old equipment, so using 30-year-old VHS equipment stuff. So 30 years ago, because it's their 30th anniversary, so 30 years ago is when the bath raids happened. So I'm interested in not so much the bath raids historically. I think we have to really reinvent that. I'm getting tired of that sort of trope of the bath raids, but I really think it's important to own it. But what happened at the bath raids for me that was really transformative was the fact that Albert Johnson's widow spoke, because Albert Johnson was a black Jamaican immigrant who was shot by the police, and during that time, the police were also harassing and killing young black men. And so the widow of Albert Johnson spoke at a rally that was against the bath raid. So you had this Jamaican widow immigrant speaking at a queer demo. And when we talk about Jamaica and queer now, it's kind of demonized, right? It's kind of like, oh my God, they hate queers. And yet 30 years ago, we had this coming together of these two communities to fight police oppression. And especially in light of what happened at the G20, I think that I'm really interested in questioning the way the police affect our lives and control our lives.
Great. Okay. We come to your questions now, Roy.
Okay. The ones I'm ready for.
Yeah. What can queer liberationists learn by looking at our past?
I think I won't say like things like I said, because I don't know how you're going to end this, right? I think our past was a time, there were times in our past when it was joyous, right? When you used to have a club and a dance and you used to go out, and so I think that joy we need to get back.
Can you hold it 1 second?
Sure.
Hold that thought. I'm going to change I back everything up.
You too. Smart.
I think you're doing really well.
Thank you, Doctor.
Okay, we're good to go.
Okay. So, as I was saying, we're on to your questions, which is, what can queer liberationists learn by looking at our past?
Okay. Should I just go from the top? I guess.
Go.
Yeah. Okay. So I think in our past we can kind of look at in the past we can look at opportunities that we took as queers to enjoy ourselves, right? Whether it was people's basements, whether it was discos, whether it was potlucks. But those were situations where we fomented what we have, the fomenting happened for what we have now. So what I think we have to learn is we have to deprofessionalize ourselves in some ways, where we're so strapped in by policy, so strapped in by rules and all those issues, that really what it is a community. So I think we have to re-look at what community was and bring that back and make lemonade out of lemons, right? I think in the past, we have to go back and probably for a lot of queer men and everyone else is look at what our leaders were, right? I think through the trauma that our community felt through AIDS, we've lost a lot of our leadership, a generation or two. And so what happened is a lot of those queers that died in the community that just turned away from the activism because we were too busy dealing with death. We lost a generation of leaders. And so we really have to kind of cultivate that leadership again, because we need leaders. And it's a nuanced thing to have a leader in part of something, but like, who are the leaders in our community? How do we, and especially when we recognize our community so diverse, where are the leaders that are people of color and trans and women and all those other things? Because what we lost were the men, mostly, through the AIDS crisis, but also I think we were at a time too when we were developing the language of inclusion, but that got washed away for a lot of people in addressing that really important issue of AIDS. So I think we're at a time now, after a couple generations, of saying, well, who's speaking for us? Like, who speaking for us in a way that is effective and a way that is inclusive? And so that's, I think, something we have to go back and learn, not necessarily to create, but actually to sort of grow from again, like I guess a branch off of a tree that kind of like wasn't there for a few years, a few generations.
This is one of those examples where I'm going to go a little bit off script because it's interesting what you were saying. It got me thinking around a number of men kind of veered off, for example, in the 80s and 90s around the HIV/AIDS crisis, and took, say, some would argue they took leadership roles in addressing a very serious and scary time in our community. Now, we fast forward to today, and there are some criticisms today around that movement, in the sense that, I'm just picking up what you're saying, we need to deprofessionalize, but that movement has become highly professionalized. It's an industry to some people.
The AIDS industry.
Yeah, and some people have shaped careers out of it, and talk about policies. The whole bit, there's a professionalism around that. And I'm just wondering if you have any comments about that. Just, you just got me thinking about that.
Well, I mean, it's great, right? But I mean, everything, even in the art world, right? Like, I mean, there have never been so many master's classes in curatorial studies. How many curators do we need, right? How many people are making art? How many people are actually being paid to make art through that money? But we've always tried to create a professional, if it sits long enough, it's going to be professionalized, right? If it sits long enough, there'll be a course at Ryerson to be doing something, right? So I mean, I think that there's this community can be destroyed by professionalism, right? Because you're entering into an economic exchange. I'm not helping you because I want to see you be alive. Of course I am, but I'm helping you because it's my job, right? And so it crosses a lot of different levels. And so I'm not saying that we shouldn't have ACT, or we shouldn't have the 519 and everything here. I'm just saying that, especially in this time when we're hearing all this talk about the ideology of austerity, I think what we have to do, confront it, is create a culture of generosity. And as an artist, as an activist, as a queer, like, how do you make sure that people are fed, right? How do you have an event where people have some food to eat, or someone to look after their kids, or something, so that there's a culture of generosity? Because when we professionalize, there's always the exchange of money, right? There's always the paycheck that you're worried about. So what's going to happen if there's no money for ACT, right? What's going to happen if there's no money for the hassle-free clinic, right? For my friend's daycare? I don't know. So we're going to, and I don't have answers for it, but I think as queers, we're in a really good position to start to think of what those answers could be, because there was a time when we didn't have it, right? We didn't use it.
And how does queer liberationism differ from gay lesbian liberation and queer nation?
Okay, I wasn't involved in queer nation. I don't know. I think it was just a lot of yelling and a lot of trying to be inclusive in an identity politic format, which in hindsight took a lot of time, but was really important. But I wasn't involved, so I'm not going to talk about queer nation. Gay and lesbian liberation, to me, is kind of just the words itself, includes that binary or gay, lesbian, and does include a lot of other things. Queer liberation is the idea that everything can be queer, right? The problem with queer liberation is my mother can be queer, right? Like, it's like, oh, she's nice, she's queer. A lot of people claim to be queer, and it seems like, for lack of a better word, it's encompassing everything now. So part of me is nostalgic for gay and lesbian liberation, because it was a time when it was pretty simple what it was. Queer liberation is like, if I have one more straight person tell me they're queer too, I'm gonna barf, right? But it's like the alphabet for pride, right? It's about 300 letters. And really, and it needs analysis, but it's like, since when is questioning something that you would celebrate, right? Like, I think it's something we would help, but I think that long list of letters to present what we are is sometimes problematic. Because if we're trying to build a community, and that community keeps fracturing into different identities, then it's going to be harder and harder, I think, to actually deal with one big community.
Okay. So we're going to move on to the theme of dissension. and you've chosen the question, are there contemporary issues that threaten queer liberation? So we could hear some examples. You don't have to speak to all of these. You may have your own examples, but it's just to get you thinking about it. So issues that threaten queer liberation, such as same-sex marriage, corporatization / mainstreaming of LGBTQ, the alphabet soup again, culture, pride celebrations, postmodernist notions of sexuality, gender identity, and identity politics.
So are there things that threaten queer liberation within queer liberation itself? Is that what you're asking? Like,
It can be within queer liberation, it can be from outside affecting queer liberation.
yeah, I mean, I think it's like a checklist, right? Like you got to be careful that you're not checking off what queer liberation is for one thing, right? So I mean, queer liberation is big, right? Queer liberation for me can be housing, right? Like, so housing is comfortable, housing, looks at different ways of people living together. Healthcare, right? Like you're covered by your partner, or what if you want to have a couple partners, right? So I mean, what are these things that we really have to kind of move into? And so when we buy into something like queer marriage or gay marriage, why aren't we saying, what about marriage, period? Right? Like, why is that said? Why are we running there? So I mean, I think it's great to have a partner. I think that's wonderful, but why is the state involved in this? And how does it work for, people that maybe have different kinds of families or whatever? I mean, there was a time when we had tons of group homes. I was just talking about this, like, not group homes, but shared housing, right? Like, Cavistown was full of queers living together, and how we don't have that so much anymore because people have different kind of like lifestyles, or it's not so much intergenerational anymore. So I think what can really threaten queer liberation is an over professionalization of it to a certain degree. Like I said, so many policies, and gay marriage is one of them. Mainstreaming, but also like everything offers an opportunity, right? Like I mean, for every will and grace, there's a critique of it, right? And there's also people trying to make culture that challenges that, right? Challenges gay marriage. So I mean, I think, again, it's making lemonade from lemons, right? I mean, queer liberation will never be achieved, right? It's always something that we're working toward. We're sort of challenging, we're questioning even what we think is queer liberation. But I think it's really important to build, right? To constantly build, to constantly recreate, to constantly, I mean, there's things that we don't have to change, but I don't think we should ever think we're there, right? We're never going to be there, but it's something to work towards. So it's more, queer liberation is a process, and it unfolds, and I don't think it's like you are here on a map. I think it's all over the map.
And I'm just going to ask, Nick, you don't have to go there, but I was thinking of the example, given your involvement with Pride, what you were saying earlier around what has sparked you in the last year around censorship and how that affects you as an artist. So, as an artist, you've gotten yourself onto Pride Toronto board, and there's been, as you know, huge controversy around what Pride has turned into after all these years. And so some of the examples here, we do have corporatization / mainstream, you mentioned mainstream, Pride celebrations. I mean, any thoughts about that? Is there anything happening in Pride celebrations that are threatening to queer liberation?
Oh yeah, I mean, when you're so hungry for the money that you're willing to make compromises on your community, I think that that's problematic. I'm not sure that Pride has done that. I think that Pride, at least when I've been there this year, I haven't seen any kind of sellouts. I don't think in the past we sold out. I just don't think we were smart about it. And I think also too, when I'm talking about the professionalization and stuff like that, there's a lot of people that volunteer at Pride that are conservative, that vote conservative, right? That, these are not necessarily, I can't speak for people on the board, but I know that there are people that support the Conservative Party that are coordinators, right? So, I mean, how do you, live with yourself? I couldn't, and be a conservative and be queer. I think that those are also very, very problematic identities when you put those two together. But there are people doing that at Pride. So for me, it's like, if you're going to get that kind of thing happening, wow, I can't even figure that out, right? So for me, it's like, yeah, that person should be on Pride, why not? But it's always going to have this level of not taking any risks. Like, I think there should be a lot of fuck you moments at Pride. It's like, for example, the Fetish Fair that's going to happen this weekend has changed its name to the Church Street Festival because it wants to make it a family-friendly event. And to me, that's so ridiculous. Like, who wants their child to see two men in a sling fist-fucking, right? Because that's what it should be, and that's what I want to see if I go to a fetish fair. I don't want to see face painting, right? But that's what, it's kind of like this funny, nice little family thing. And I'm anti that. Like, I mean, I think there's a great place. Take your kid to Riverdale Park, but don't take it to a fetish fair. Or take it to a fetish fair and leave me alone because it's a fetish fair, right? So I think that there's that kind of thing. Like, it's the BIA, right, that wants this family fun event. And so for me, that's ridiculous. So that to me is not queer liberation or moving toward any kind of liberation. It's buying into some corporate idea that also anything you go to nowadays is all about shopping, right? If it's like Taste of the Danforth, they're selling like t-shirts and they're selling food and they're selling all this other stuff. But where's the kind of like community building if it's all about shopping? Like it makes me sick now when you see all this kind of like, what was I at? Like everything like junction art things. They're selling like these ugly pieces of art, right? But it's like, why don't they just show the art? Like, why do we have to purchase it? But it's all about like vendors and making money. So I think, yeah, I don't know if that answers any of your questions.
I think it does. Okay. So you chose one under intersectionality as well, and this is what can queer liberationists teach other theoretical or perspective frameworks or movements?
How to have fun. I think queers can teach people how to have fun. I really do believe that. I mean, I love queers. I think we know how to have a party. Some of us not so much. Some of us have to be trained from the inside. But I think a lot of these organizations really, need to know how to have a dinner party, a picnic, a potluck, have sex, make it sexy, dance, all of those things. Emma Goldman, I think she can actually, you've got to dance the revolution. I think queers know how to do that.
Okay. And then you've got a few here under the last category, which is today and tomorrow. What do you see as the most important fronts for our movements going forward?
Moving forward? I think building community is always important. I don't think we can ever forget that, we need to take care of each other, we need to be kind to each other, we need to make sure that we have, water when we're marching, and we need to make sure that everyone's listening to. I once, working in video, I had this artist who I respect, Jonathan Coe, was trying to actually create this video where he took kind moments from demos and tried to put them together, and he had a really hard time with it, right? And yet there were times when people were helping people that had been gassed, or people were giving people water, picking them up when they'd fallen. But I mean, the fact that he had a hard time doing that, to me, means that there might be some work to do around actually like being kind to each other. And I know it sounds maybe a little bit too Oprah, but for me it's like, taking care of each other is really important. And I don't think that we can diminish that at all. Like, somebody's arriving late, doesn't matter, relax. Don't be so professional, and relax and be kind.
Describe the impact of queer youth cultures, queer liberationism, and the role of queer liberation elders in today's movement.
Well, I don't think we're as intergenerational as we could be. I'm often the oldest man in the room. And I don't know why that is. Like, I don't know what happened. AIDS happened, a lot of people died that just got exhausted or burnt out, and so we don't see them that much. But I go to events, and it's not, you don't see people my age as much as you see younger people. And so I feel that, like, older people are somehow maybe lonely or shut in or aren't given access to things because, older people don't shop. So, if you're going to have a festival where it's just shopping, I don't need another t-shirt, right? I don't need a rainbow hair clip, right? But that's what it seems to be. So, we have to kind of like, when it comes to elders, we have to kind of like say, well, what do they want? What do they want? And they want the same things as young people? Do they want different things? Young people, I think, have a great thing to teach around the sexuality and fluidity, right? Like, I mean, I grew up in a real, you know, if you're a man, you sleep with men, and if you're a woman, you're a lesbian, you sleep with women, and then now I think there's a whole kind of way of like, sexuality is not even like bisexuality, because that's what we'd say when I was growing up, or you're bi, but I think there's a kind of like, no, I'm queer, but I might sleep with a woman, or I'm not. People aren't as uptight about sexuality as they were when I was younger, so I think that's really good. Although you could argue that a younger generation is quite conservative too, right? I mean, there's dating. I didn't even know what dating was. Like, so we're going on a date. What the fuck is a date? So, and then I think also younger people tend to be much more in tune with what the whole trans community is asking for, whereas I think that the older community, the elder community, had to really learn a lot from the trans community as far as like what that means, where they're moving, what they want. So I think that that's what we can learn from younger people.
I'm just thinking here for a second, again, off script. And I think you were just beginning to touch on this. Are there opportunities for young and elder people to come together and teach each other, learn from each other?
Picnics. People can come together at picnics and social events. And of course we want to screw each other, right? So I mean, it's kind of like at bars, but bars aren't made for people my age anymore, right? Like, I mean, I love dancing, I love music, but the thing is, like, I can't hear, right? So there's no quiet ones. Also, I don't drink, right? So, and also people are moving to Grindr or other ways of hooking up. So you go to a bar now and it's kind of like an underclass of people. People that can't afford Grindr or don't know how to use a computer, and they just, or maybe they're drinking or whatever, but there's no, I don't know how you, like campfires, like, I don't know, we have to kind of create something where people come together and it's sexy and it's fun, you know, like Queer and Terror's going to the island for a picnic. Well, maybe that's, you know, where we have to start to rebuild movements, right? Like, and it's hard in Canada, it gets cold, and so in the wintertime we're all inside. But I think in summertime when you see people hanging out, like, you know, it's really amazing. I live by Trinity Bellwoods Park. I don't live by Trinity Bell. I go to work through Trinity Bellwoods Park. And I used to live around there, and the park never was as busy as it is now. Like, there's young people, 20-somethings, in groups of like 10, 4, picnicking, talking all day. And it seems to me that when I was growing up, a lot of people had cottages or camps. And now I think because of the economy, there's a generation there that doesn't have the cottage to go to every week, right? Maybe they bought a condo around there or something, but that whole thing, or they're immigrants, and like, you know, but the thing is that whole culture of like the summer cottage is gone for a lot of people. So how do we socialize? So the summer, Toronto's full of people. Like, it doesn't get quiet in the summer anymore. And so when I go through the park and I see all these 20-somethings hanging out, I go like, well, this is good. I mean, you know, it's that cottage generation where you had a house in the city and a cottage in the country, that's changing. It's too expensive to afford that now. So you're seeing people kind of stay in the city and do things. So I think that there's opportunities for us to kind of organize that kind of stuff around people coming together. I don't know.
Okay, great. My place here. Okay, great. So, what has been the most revolutionary new idea or theory that you see as important to our queer liberationist movement? And queer liberationist is in brackets, so just...
I chose that?
Yeah, you kind of highlighted.
The most important idea?
What has been the most revolutionary new idea, theory?
I don't know. Well, I would say that there's two things maybe we have to sort of deal with, right? And that's like Facebook activism versus real activism. And the idea that you can click on like and you're actually doing something, right? Like when I organized this thing last night, 350 people said they were coming. We had 100 people show up. That's amazing. But at the same time, too, it's kind of like this. I believe that small groups can change the world. Right? Like Margaret Mead said, it's the only thing that ever has. So I think we're into, because of Facebook and all these other things, that we believe the more, and even as an artist, right, like what's a successful show? When it's sold out, when you can't move. But really, if you can transform 3 or 4 people's lives from your art, maybe that's all you have to do, right? Maybe that's all. So I think there's this tension in our lives where YouTube, that video was seen by 5 million people and transformed them. But really, like, maybe that film was seen by 100 people and one of them transformed. Like, I mean, I don't know. I think that where the idea of mass communication is great because you can mobilize people like crazy. And so I really think things like social media is a great mobilizer for everyone. But I also think we have to be really careful not to divide each other into those things and lose the sort of face-to-face, the telephone conversations, all of that stuff. It is really essential to build a community. So I don't know whether that's not revolutionary. Well, I guess social media is revolutionary, but I think it has its downfalls too.
What role will academics/artists/frontline activists have in the movement moving forward?
What will they have? Okay.
Because in a way, you're like that too, right? The video stuff that you do, you help people create.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you see your role affecting?
I chose that. What was I thinking? Okay. Read the question again. So
It's what role will academics/artists/frontline activists have in the movement moving forward?
What I'd like to see activists and artists and theorists is actually making connections to people and ideas so that I feel comfortable talking about certain things that might not be seen as queer issues, that might be seen as like the city hall. I keep saying, like, how do I relate to daycare? Right? I don't have kids. I have friends that have kids, right? But how do I actually make an impact on saving the city from those cuts for daycare right now? So I think that it's really hard because it's exhausting, right? To look at the world and go, it all needs changing. So I think that it's making links and connections to people that are doing that and supporting them. So how are activists supporting artists? How are artists supporting academics? How are academics supporting activists? So because what happens is we all get into our worlds, and so there's an academic conference at UT, and one artist will speak, one activist will speak, but they'll talk about artists, they'll talk about activists. And the same thing with artists, like when they do art, there might not be any support from activists there, or, so I think it's trying to make those connections is the most important thing when we move forward, especially with cuts looming and this whole talk about austerity. It's a long-term thing, but I think that we professionalize ourselves and bureaucratize ourselves into these roles that maybe need a bit shaken up. So I think that to make those connections between those groups is really important.
Right. So the very last question, that's required, that you don't have to answer, is it's oxymoron there, but given the questions asked and the discussion we just had, are there any further comments or thoughts you would like to share before we end the interview?
Any last words, Brian?
I think I said a lot.
You did. You said plenty.
I can't think.
Is there any comment that you want me to comment that has affected you in any way?
Well, I think there's been a lot of changes in our community over the last couple of years. I think that what happened around Choir last year mobilized this community like never before and made a lot of us into friends and allies that never happened before. So I think that's great. I think that kind of connections have to be maintained, and we hope that Queer Ontario makes that happen. In fact, when Pride, I know that Queer Ontario is going to talk to Pride about something, and they were finishing thing, and one person in the boardroom said, "And Roy, you have to be here when they present." I said, "Well, why? Why do I have to be here if they're presenting?" He says, "Well, they're your people. They're your peeps." And I said, "Well, it's totally crazy, right? I'll be here, but they should be your peeps too, right?" But everybody's so afraid of criticism because criticism sometimes isn't kind, right? But if we all sort of think that we're working together, and then somebody else in the room piped up, "Well, I should be there too because they're my peeps as well." So, it wasn't just me. But this idea that we're all at odds is really something that's very difficult. So I hope that the work that Queer Ontario does and Pride does and I do will kind of make room that's kind enough so I can criticize you without destroying you, right? Or you feeling unsafe to say something when we don't know what it is. We're dealing with these changes in this life that we don't have answers. It'd be ridiculous to think we do. So how do we build a community where we can be in kindness, but also be able to criticize or be able to inform or challenge, right? Because I think that's what happened. I know that one of the questions was about identity politics, and what happened with that was challenging became really